I get this recording going. Cool. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, sweet. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, actually, maybe we'll just open up really quick. Do you all have any initial questions or thoughts of anything I can answer right now, before I kind of jump into like, hey, what comes up next after the Google Doc with the design and the database? Okay. Well, feel free to raise a hand anywhere along the way. I know you're all in a pretty good spot with the Google Doc. I'm assuming you're in the stage, you're getting close to the stage of doing your Figma design. And so instructions, I'm assuming after the Google Doc, you're moving on to designing the UI. And this is we went through this in the full or in the junior front end project where you sign to Figma, you import the starter file, you give it your name and everything. So I assume that that's kind of like clear, so I won't necessarily like walk through that. Also, as you are like diving into like Figma, if you're kind of have any questions along the way, like reach out to me. I'm not assuming that everything is always, you remember, from something that happened like weeks ago. So I'm happy to kind of jump in there, discuss anything. Um, if you need, a refresher for like a YouTube video of how to work with like the Figma tool, got a couple helpful ones. Happy to send that your way. But ultimately, for the design stage of things, we don't want Figma to take too long. So you should just be doing one feature in Figma. And I've seen students kind of like get put too much into this, and something that should really just take like a few hours ends up taking like 2 days. Um, so what I would say is when you have started working on this first feature, set your clock, put a 4 hour timer on it, and when that 4 hours is up, basically kind of consider yourself done. Get as much as you can do in 4 hours. And obviously, like if it looks like all you did was put a nav bar in, that then you might want to do some thinking like, okay, why is that progress so slow that I've only done a nav bar in that time? And you might need to like reach out to me and we can kind of talk about like what the hang up is. But I think you should kind of give yourself, say, like, okay, 4 hours and design like, your house is on fire. Like I'm just trying to get something done in 4 hours. And that's going to be probably good enough, even if you don't even feel like you've completed that whole feature. It's going to give you a good idea of like, okay, this is the colors I want to use, sort of the feel I want to have for the rest of my site. So I've just seen students get hung up on this. 4 hours should be your time limit to feel like, okay, I'm done. Now you might feel like, okay, I'm 80% there. I just need like another hour or so or whatever. Like that's fine. It doesn't have to be like an absolute 4 hours. Yeah, Trey.
While we're talking about design, um, I know in the use context you used, or as an example, you gave us like the theme.
Hmm.
So can we use pre-built themes and components and kits and all that, or are we supposed to do this completely on our own?
Yeah, kind of like how there's like Material UI and Bootstrap UI. Like, is that what you're asking? Can you like bring in things, libraries like that?
Correct.
Yeah, so my thought is you can. Um, oftentimes that's oftentimes that's more work even because then you're having to figure out like how do I use the Material UI library? How do I use the Bootstrap library? When really it's like, okay, I want to create a nav bar element. I'm going to give it a height of, 120 pixels. I'm going to do, oh my gosh, how do I flex box to have one item on the left, one item on the right? Or I've often found that students actually code faster, trying to still just do stuff in a vanilla type of way rather than relying on libraries. However, you are welcome to pull on those libraries if you've had experience working with them and you're kind of like, oh, I like that. Yeah, I'd say that's fine. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Um, cool. All right. So, assuming you all get that done today, and I would say like kind of like as far as you're thinking like where you should be, like kind of like to make sure that you're in a good spot to like really get coding on this is this design should be done by today. And again, that's just feature one. So I would really aim deeply to get to that point by the end of the day, or else I'd consider yourself like behind. Um, one thing before I forget is a little off topic but related, is during the final project weeks, I should say, Robert, the in-person instructor, he does daily lectures, and these are required. They're not optional, and they're oftentimes around subjects that are kind of like preparing you for like the real workforce and the way to think about things. Oftentimes they'll relate to like what you're working on tangentially, but they're more like thinking like long-term career stuff. And the first one is today at, let me double check that. 1:30. So post lunch, 1:30, he's going to do a lecture on just good work habits. Um, that will be the only afternoon session he does at 1:30. The remainder of them will be at 9 a.m. in the morning. So we'll kick off the day with Robert doing a senior lecture on some sort of subject. So those are definitely required. And I'll just kind of put a plug in that we'll have make sure to have our video cameras on and not off. You're not forced to engage. He will like say anyone have a question. Engagement's great. You don't necessarily like have to like verbally respond to stuff. But we want to have our cameras on just as being a participating audience. I'll be in on most of those lectures. Some of them I have seen about 20 times, so I do sort of like some admin stuff on the side. But even if I'm doing admin stuff on the side, I'll typically have my camera on and still be present because oftentimes he wants to do like a mic check or a visual check. So I try to be present to offer that feedback to him. So again, just note scheduling today. We do have that's going to take up about an hour of your time, 1:30 to 2:30. If obviously, if there's ever something that comes up, reach out to me. Let me know you're not going to make it, and it's not going to be the end of the world if you're not going to make it. So it'll be fine. So, um, yeah, I digress. So I guess I did mention that because like today, we should, get your Figma feature one design done, knowing that you are losing like an hour to that lecture as you are pacing yourself. So once you get that done, what I do want to touch on is the design of your database schema and how you might think about uh, figuring that out. Um, we don't you notice like in our lectures on Postgres and whatnot, we talk about how to, query a database to, read content, create content, update content, and delete content, but we don't talk about how to create your schema, right? How to create those tables. And oftentimes because that is not what anyone from LearningFuze gets into professionally, to be like the people who create and architect databases. So we don't spend a whole lot of time on it. But for your project, you do need to have a database, right? And so like when we've worked on different exercises where we have that student grade table that was already populated for us, where we have the Pagilla database, the schema was already populated for us, and you just do that DB import. So we've needed to use a database. We just haven't created them. And so that's what you'll need for your project. Just about every student has a database that they interact with. And so, Trey, if you don't mind, I'm gonna play off of what your project is, and kind of like walking through this. And if you do mind, you can shoot me a DM, but I'll just do it anyways. So, I see that thumbs up though, so good to have your approval. So basically, like, so how you might create your database design is we have a tool called, or not a tool, it's a website called dbdiagram .io. And so you'll create an account for it. You can do up to 10 diagrams free. We only need to create one schema, so like that's plenty. That's more than enough. Um, when you do get in there, you'll have actually this like sample code right here, this pre-populated table. And this just kind of shows you like what a schema might look like. If you had, if your app had users, they'd probably want to have an ID, a username, a password created at If you were like this might be like some sort of like e-commerce type site where like there are different like products to choose from. And if it's an e-commerce site, you might have like a shopping cart. So a cart items table. And then down below this syntax is kind of like basically how these tables are connected to each other, like the keys that link them together. And then you get this nice little visual output that shows you like, okay, here's your three tables. Here's how they are connected. So that's what this tool does for us. When you look at your tables and they look like everything that you are want to use or whatnot, and they're in a satisfactory place. And of course, this is something that you can like reach out to me and I'll take a look at as well and kind of look at the scope of your project and your features and your tables and kind of say like, oh yeah, that does look good. Then ultimately you're going to export to Postgres.sql, and that's basically going to create um, a schema for you. And let's see, you can sure. Um, you can ignore most things on this text editor right here. I'm messing around with something called Cursor AI. I'm not sure if you all have seen that text editor. It's essentially something that you type in, like, I want to build this app, and it literally codes the whole freaking app for you. So it seems pretty interesting. But that untitled, that SQL file, I just downloaded, it popped up in Cursor AI. So I'm being lazy and just dragging up this whole screen. But we can see is that it actually generated the schema that, in your starter code for your full stack project, you're going to have a schema.sql file, and you're just going to copy this and paste it in, and you have your schema all set up. So when you run db import, it actually like generates that in PG web. And so chances are y'all are gonna not want to do this, right? This does I know what both of your projects are, and this schema doesn't relate to what either of you are doing. And so in creating your schema in db.io, there's some tips here. This is worth like reading through and whatnot and figuring out how to build your schema. Um, what I would do though, and this is what I just kind of like demoed, is this is where like AI can be like a tool of assistance. Because we are working, we have like 2.5 weeks, or what is it, 2 weeks and one day till we present. Wait, seven, yeah, 2 weeks and one day till we present, and we don't have like a day and a half to figure out how to use db.io and figure out all this syntax. And this isn't the main thing that you're learning at LearningFuze. What you're trying to figure out is like, how do I get the appropriate database with the schema set up? And that's where like an AI tool can help you avoid that pain, which when I first started teaching here at LearningFuze, that wasn't necessarily something that we were able to do. And we'd have like 8 students trying to build their schemas, and it was a pretty wild experience. Um, but you can use an AI. Um, and let me actually drop this in our off-topic channel just so we can have that as a reference. Uh, at channel schema building example. So I was messing around, and let me zoom in on this. And I gave some context. I'm working on a website called dbdiagram.io. It is a tools, my grammar's not working, to help me create a schema for my database. Here's a sample code they set by default for a schema. So I literally like just copied this and pasted it in just for the AI to have some context of, what tool I'm using, what syntax does it use. And then I said, I want you to help me replace this default code with a schema that I would use for my application. And then Trey, this is where I stole your work. A full stack web application for users who want to securely generate, store, and manage passwords. And then I listed the features. User can create a new password entry with website name, username and password. User can read and save passwords. User can update. User can delete password entries, right? And so I just paste that in. It thought for a second, just the model I'm using does thinking. It's a little, I have like the, not the, I have the model above free. If you use the free model, you're going to basically get the exact same results. So it spit out, below is an example schema adapted for a password management application. In this design, there's a user table for user authentication and a password for securely storing each password entry associated with a specific website or service. You can further customize the schema by adding fields. So it's saying like, you can do more than just this, but here you go. So I'm going to copy that and go to db.io. And ideally, you've changed this to, tray password manager. You want to make sure that you've like have this saved, and then you can paste in what the AI gave you. And really excited about seeing this is that there's only two tables that you're gonna have to work with, which is nice because I've had some students with what they're building is like 4 or 5 tables, and you can imagine like the joins you got to do and the chaos that would ensue. And the AI is basically like, yeah, you could pull off what you're trying to do with two tables. One for users, obviously, because your passwords are not going to be publicly exposed to everyone, and there needs to be a way that you're saving just things for just a specific user. And so this is what it's going to look like. So you can look at that and say like, okay, does it have everything that I'm looking for? It does. If you're like, oh, I'm not sure about that, and ultimately before you move on to the next thing, you will have to send me your DB diagram link so I can take a look at it like ultimately. But even if before you're settled, you can reach out to me and say, okay, it looks like this is what's being generated. Does this feel like it's on the right track? Um, I'm happy to take a look. Um, so ultimately, like that's pretty much all set. Um, and then you may want to have seed data for your app. Um, so that's one thing that on the next step, I was like, great, that's perfect. I talk nice to the AIs in case they take over someday. And it's more just like for my mentality. 'Cause sometimes I get really mean towards AIs when they don't, when it doesn't give me back the information. So it just keeps me in a better mindset to say things like great and thank you. Um, but basically I said like, hey, can you provide me with some seed data? So, because ultimately, like with a lot of the databases we're looking at in previous exercises, such as student grade table or Pagilla or whatnot, there was like seed data that you brought in. And so it's spit out some seed data. Like we're going to create some users for the users table, and we're going to create some password entries for the um, password entries table, if that was called. And so you kind of have both of those things have been generated for you. And you may have to tweak the seed data a little bit to make sure it's like going to suit your purposes. But ultimately, when you've done that, you'll want to export um, from DB diagram. And I demonstrated that earlier. When I've kind of given the approval, you're going to do the export to both Postgres.sql, and that's going to basically create um, that code the way you want it. So here it is. So you'd grab this .sql content in here, and that's what we're going to bring into the full stack project. So you're not, and obviously you're not able to bring that into the project yet because we haven't cloned anything. But um, essentially, once you have that done and you've generated that file, then you're actually ready in your application to get going. And so, like, I'll kind of demonstrate getting your project up and running. But before I do that, any questions on like that process that I just walked through for creating, a schema and some seed data and exporting it to be Postgres compatible? So the next thing is setting up your full stack project template. So you'll go here, you'll click on this link, and this is going to be a little bit different. We haven't done this before, and the instructions tell us to do this, so you don't have to remember this from memory, but you're going to click use this template, and you're going to create a new repository. Um, I call this password manager system. And interesting. I would have thought that it would have told us, full stack Pern application for managing passwords. Um, I'm not too caught up on your description. You'll click create repository, and that'll take a few seconds. And your gut instinct might be to move on to this deploying your new repository. That's probably like the next thing I would think to do. But what you're going to do first is I've made this repo. It's finished doing its work. We can see it's password manager system. You're going to scroll down and we already did these steps where you use this template, create a new repository, owner. Oh, this is where it is. Owner, select your name like I did, give it a name. Full stack project is not good, so that's why I gave mine password management system. Optional, add a description, so I gave an optional description. I left it as public. I didn't include all branches, and click the green repository, create repository from template button. Um, Seems like that's what we did up here, unless I'm missing something. Anyways, if you're stepping through these instructions and any of them don't make sense, obviously just kind of like reach out right away. So now once you've done that, so I've got this repo right here. Um, we want to clone this newly created repo and LFZ code. So from our newly created GitHub, click the green code button right here. And we're going to go ahead and do like our copy of our SSH. And again, whoops, that's just following step 1 right here. And then we want to open up LFZ code. And sorry, let me grab that. I have it on my other monitor buried beneath like 50 things. And we're going to click on the blue button in the bottom left-hand corner. So click on that blue button. Um, I've had this happen before. What I gotta do, open new window. We're basically looking for a clone repository and container volume. So we're clicking on that. Let me make sure I've copied the SSH key again. Clone repository and container volume. I gotta remember my old coworker's passphrase for this. Oh gosh. Yeah, that was it. Sweet. All right. So we're following that step. Clone repository and container volume. All of that should be what I just covered. It's how we've done like, cloning our solutions repo and all of that. So nothing new there. All right. So it's finishing up. Its work. It might just take a moment. All right, should be there soon. And I really hope when I go to run these commands that I don't have other applications running. I probably do, and we'll probably run into some conflicts, but that'll be fun. We'll troubleshoot together. There we go. Okay, so obviously, like you should just see like your project right here. You're not having to move up and down in the system or anything. Um, here's password manager system. If I type in ls, I'm going to see the client, the database, the server, etc. So we should be able to do npm install, and that's going to look at our package.json at this top level, and it's going to do like all the proper installations for the client and the server and everything that's in there. Yeah, no errors. Thank goodness. And then we're going to make sure that we've started Postgres. All right, so that's good. We started it. I might even at this point have another window open and do PG web just to make sure that that's working. Okay. There we go. It just took a second. So we got that up and going. Obviously, like PG Web, we don't even have like a database created yet. All right, refresh that. Not sure why that's hanging up, but we'll give it a second. I think my computer is feeling a little overwhelmed. Um, cool. So back to our instructions. We got Postgres started, and so we want to create a database. So we're going to run this command, create DB, name of database. I'll go ahead and do that right here. Create DB, and I'm going to call this password manager. That seems to make sense. Now, the next step is we need to make sure that server.env is updated. And I would, just to really eliminate any chance of mistyping something, I like to just copy and paste exactly what was in the terminal. And whoopsie, did I do that? Okay, so yeah, so in .env example, we want to change the database URL, and then in .env database URL. Okay, so it's changed in both spots. And then also you're going to change the value of token secret to just string here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Make sure both of those are saved. And then make the same changes. Okay, so we did that in the example file as well. We're going to be using a project or a database. If you weren't, you just delete that dev.db script. So now we want to go ahead and do npm run dev. Okay, yeah, so we'll do npm run dev. This is where we really find out if I have any other stuff running. Okay, cool. So we see listening on port 8080. So that's the good news. That's how I would check to see like, okay, the server's up and running because we got that console.log. And then the other thing we really want to make sure it's working is our front end application, that we're not running into any sort of errors. There we go. So our Vite app is up and running, so we can kind of feel confident. That's like a check mark to say like, okay, looks like everything is going according to what the instructions are expecting. Anytime you want to kill the server, again, in here, Control C, I think you have to click it twice or Control D once. We verified that the client's working. That's good to go. Um, oh, we want to make sure that we see this message. Um, this means that we have a little backend endpoint set up already in server.ts. So now the next step is to set up your database. So you've exported your database from that dbdiagram.io. And so we want to bring that in. So you're going to go to your schema. And this is going to be really important. Leave what's here. Um, and so your mental clue can be to look at your final product for your schema.sql should look like this, where there's all of this original content up to public. So that's how we know to leave that. And then you'll go ahead and bring in what you got from dbdiagram.io. So let me find that again. Downloads. So I'm going to paste that in. Um, Again, all of this stuff is left here. And then what's down below is what came from dbdiagram.io that was set up for to be Postgres compatible. And then you can get your seed data. So I'm just going to go to this right here where we got our seed data and go to data.sql. And we'll see if this is compatible. I might have wanted to give the AI this example of what the seed data needs to look like, but I think that this looks compatible. So we'll save that. We've saved our schema. And now our next step is going to be to run npm run db import. So we're running that script that's going to import in our data and our schema. So you have to have another tab to do that. Sweet, no errors. And you can close that tab. You don't have to leave that tab open. So ideally, what I would expect to see is now if you go to PG Web and we do a refresh, we know that we've created a database, password manager, and we've got our users populated with seed data and our password entries populated with seed data. So it seems like that's I would, if that didn't work, that's when you'd reach out to me as an instructor, and we'd troubleshoot. So use PG Web or PSQL to verify your tables were created. So yeah, I was just demoing with PG Web. We've seeded the database. If you were to make, this is just something to note, if for some reason you need to change your schema or you wanted to change your seed data, you just have to make sure that you do npm run db import, and that will refresh in your database to reflect what it looks like in schema and data.sql. Once all of that is done, now you're at the point of doing deployment. And that's where, right after you created your repository are the instructions on deploying your repository. So this bold text is just saying basically in your full stack project template, follow these deployment instructions. Deployment can easily take an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. You have to be very precise because you're deploying your front end, your back end, and your database. So there's a lot of configuration that needs to take place. Um, I would highly recommend by like midday tomorrow, be working on the deployment. So that way, if you kind of get stuck anywhere, I can jump into a room, troubleshoot with you because it is very like detail specific and it's nice to have an extra set of eyes. And then at that point, your project is deployed and anything that you like merge to main is going to be like the redeployment takes like 5 seconds. But the first initial deployment is very, very tech heavy, very step by step, very precise. And then from there, after you've done that, you're ready to actually like start coding your project. One thing I did want to highlight is if you all were to look at this example here, is after that, like I said, great, the next thing I need to do is write my backend code. And, I'm working in Node. Here's what my server TS file looks like. And then I say, can you help me write the endpoints for this? And you can actually look at like the AI will actually generate the endpoints for you. Um, when it did that though, it didn't have like user management as a factor. So I was like, hang on, I have user management. Can you help me account for that? And it spit out all the endpoints as well. So you want to be careful with like AI, not to just be like, oh, cool, I'm going to copy this code and paste it in, because then you're not learning. And oftentimes, it doesn't have the same context that you have to understand exactly what you're doing. So if you just copy and paste, it's not going to work anyways. But you can kind of take it as a feel for like, okay, this is what my registration endpoint's going to look like, or this is what my get all passwords is going to look like, etc. So you kind of take a look at that. But um, yeah, where we are currently at is once you all finish your design, then you're going to start working on your database in dbdiagram.io. Once you've got that done and approved in dbdiagram.io, you're then going to follow the steps of creating your repository right here and kind of go through just everything that I went through, making sure that you've installed everything, everything is running in the browser and your server's running, and then bringing in your actual database with your seed data and whatnot. And then the next step will be deployment. So, any thoughts or questions? I know that's a lot all at once.
So I can basically just go clone what you just created, right?
You can't. I mean, honestly, you can. You want to like, kind of like read through and make sure you got a feel for like what all of that meant. Um, I would even if I was you, I'd experiment putting the same input into an AI and see what it gives you back, just as like that experience. But yeah, essentially, you could honestly just follow that path. Um, Sweet. I'm gonna go ahead and